Hello, this is the first video lecture for EDFN5024. I will do video lectures pretty often, and I'm doing it, I think I'm going to be posting this one through Edpuzzle so that you can answer questions as you go. Please do so because it helps me see what you're understanding, and it also can help you stay a little more engaged and pay attention as well. And so we're going to start. Let me share my screen here. We're going to talk about technology and affordances. So our main topics are what is technology. We'll talk about what technology has to do with learning and education, and then this idea of affordances, which is a core part of how we learn to use technology effectively. So we get to go to a dictionary definition, why not, of technology. The application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes. Note, it doesn't say anything about computers or digital learning. Usually today, when we use the word technology, we mean digital technologies, but that's not the only kind of technology. In fact, some technology is not even an object, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, it's important to think about the progress across time because it helps us put things in perspective. So I want you to explore this website and think about, what do you think is the most impactful technology of all time? So go ahead onto the Britannica History of Technology timeline and write in the box, what do you think out of all of these is the most impactful technology? Okay, so thanks for doing that. I'm curious. I'll be looking to see what you said. Now, I said earlier, technologies are not just things. They can also be ideas or processes or theories. So for example, we could take an object like the Ford Model T, this car. It's what some might call a product technology. It's an actual thing. But behind a lot of product technologies are what we call idea technologies. Those are concepts or different ways of doing things that are also considered technologies. So the idea of an assembly line where we can increase efficiency by having different people do different parts of a design could also be considered a technology. And it was what made the Model T significant. So the technology isn't just the object. A lot of the time it has to do with ideas behind the objects. So what does this have to do with learning and education? Well, I want you to read through this quote here and write, what year do you think this quote was written from? Okay, big reveal of the answer. 1933, Devereux, Engelhardt, Mort, and Stoddard, I believe is how you say their names. And they were talking about the introduction of the talking picture or the film strip. They says, I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit of this. It may prove to be an event as epochal as the application of the principle of the wheel to transportation or the application of steam power to the industrial age. So they were very excited about this talking picture thing. And although I'm making fun of it a little bit, it actually is pretty significant. Being able to show students pictures with audio about something really does change what they can see and learn about the world. Let's think about what else might be epochal. We have Zoom, right? What would those authors think about Zoom, where we can have one teacher and they can teach, at least portray information in videos to students all over the world? What is exciting about that? What is maybe not as exciting about that? The idea that we can have an iPad, especially having students be able to take pictures and videos. Or now the big thing is this virtual reality, that we can have a student take them on a tour to a rainforest and they can actually experience the sights and sounds of that rainforest. How does that compare? Is that different from the talking picture? I want you to write about that. What's the difference between a talking picture, where all of a sudden we could show students video and audio of something, and virtual reality, where we're still using video and audio, but maybe in a different way? Do you think those are different idea technologies? They're different products, but are they different ideas? Go ahead and write about it in the comments, the question. Okay, so as we continue to go through these things about educational technologies, let's talk a little bit about some history. These are potentially failed, but maybe they aren't failed. So we're going to start with 1870. We have a magic lantern. I recently read a novel that talked about the magic lantern, and I never really heard of one before. But it had, you actually put a candle inside to project the light. It was like a projector, but with a candle. And this was actually a really exciting product when they put it in schools, because all of a sudden they were able to focus on what they called visual inquiry. So instead of just focusing on words all the time, or maybe having some pictures in books that students could look at individually, we now have a big picture on the wall that students can look at and they can investigate. They can look at pictures of cells, for example, or different places or nature, and they can actually ask questions and learn from the visual. It's a pretty cool invention if you think about it. How about this one? This is radio. In 1920, radio was invented and actually used pretty prominently in education. In Australia, the students that lived out in the rural settings on the outback actually did quite a bit of school over the radio. So, again, is this idea technology, is this different from Zoom, or is this the same as Zoom? The idea behind it. It portrays learning in a certain type of way. It says when we learn, if we just listen to content, that is quite a bit of learning. And that's something to consider. Okay, here's another one. I think this is the last one. This is called the teaching machine, and it was by Skinner in 1960. So Skinner is kind of the person who founded behaviorism, where he worked with rats and other animals, and they had the stimulus and the response, rewarding behaviors and then reducing negative behaviors to try to get animals to learn. And then he applied that to humans. So the teaching machine used this idea called programmed instruction. And that was the idea that based on a student's response, they may or the next question that would be asked of the student would be based on that response. So the teaching machine could actually adapt to what students said and responded. So for example, if they were going to memorize something, it could review or ask another question if they missed it, or if they misunderstood something, it could come back to it. So programmed instruction. I want you to think and write about, have you seen any examples of programmed instruction that uses other products, maybe even today technologies? Can you think of any other ideas of programmed instruction? Okay, so the best idea I can think of right now with programmed instruction is a lot of online software for different basic skills. A lot of it's memory-based, where the algorithm of the computer actually sends students on different tracks depending on their answers. It's more complex than the teaching machine, but it's a similar idea. Okay, so now we're going to talk about affordances. And in some ways, affordances are what connects the product technologies and the idea technologies. But let's step back just a little bit and talk about what an affordance is. So I have two definitions here. The first one is mostly from computer user interaction folks. And they talk about affordances as properties of objects which show the users the actions they can take. Okay. And so that's like these car doors. You know what to do when you see a car door. The way it's designed tells you what to do with it. Or this iPhone unlock. There are written directions, but it's pretty intuitive. And so they call that an affordance. It's intuitive to use it in a certain way. You can also think about that as, what is it good for? It's intuitive to use highlighters to highlight text because it's see-through. And so highlighters are really good for marking text, versus Sharpies aren't so good at that unless you want to cross stuff out. But it's permanent, it's bold, and so it is used for other things. So affordances are basically, what are the normal, natural uses of this tool? Now, if we design poorly and we actually don't take into consideration of affordances, we can come into some bad situations. So for example, this was a ballot, 2000, I think it was 2000. It was the contested election of 2000. And this was the ballot, I believe, in Florida, and it was very confusing. The affordance did not show people what to do. The arrows were confusing. And so it caused a lot of problems with the lost election. Here's another example, doors. Push and pull doors. They shouldn't look the same. That does not help people open the door. It gets very confusing. I found this online the other day. Yeah, it's embarrassing because you always open the door the wrong way. Designers talk about this a lot. They get very annoyed by doors because they do not use affordances well. Okay, so let's talk about an education example. So let's talk about the pencil, right? So pencils, when they first came out, the big affordance with pencil was because of the way the lead worked. We could write firm and we could shade, much different than we could do with, say, ink or even charcoal. And that was a big affordance of the pencil to start this shading. Well, people discovered that they could also erase the pencil. They could use a dried out piece of bread and they could erase the markings. So that became something new that was very exciting, that you could erase your writings. And so then this guy named Herman Lippmann came along and he actually created a pencil, an eraser to go on a pencil. So he is pushing this erasing thing further. He has a new technology with the affordance of supporting erasing. So if we take these ideas together, this pencil with the eraser, it has actually impacted education in many ways and our own behaviors. So if you think about when you take notes with a pencil, when I do crossword puzzles, I'm not brave enough to use a pen because I know I'm going to make mistakes. In fact, when I do it, I'll kind of write something lightly because I'm not totally sure, but the pencil lets me do that. Elementary school teachers have students use pencils all the time because they want them to correct their work. The pencil makes it easy to set up the expectation that if you do something incorrectly, you should erase it and fix it. Without pencils, that type of mindset might not be as present in our education system. And then it goes even bigger. Standardized tests, they are reliant on pencils. It is possible we could have some other type of test without the pencil, but it seems to have greatly impacted how we have built standardized tests in our current world. Okay, so the point of this is that the affordances of technology can push us to do certain things. It can change how we act, how we teach, and how we learn. So when you're using a new technology, you want to choose something where the affordances align with your purposes. And does it align with what you believe about teaching and learning? So if we're going to use Zoom for synchronous discussions, or for a lecture where a teacher gives the students lectures and the students can maybe respond, except it's hard over video conferencing, does that align with what you believe about teaching and learning? Is it sustaining current educational practices or is it changing them? And don't get me wrong, some current educational practices are probably effective. We want to continue those, but just using a new tool, a new product, doesn't mean we're actually changing teaching and learning. We want to think about how is this allowing us to act differently? And then that goes along with, is it actually offering something new? Are the affordances, the ideas behind these technologies actually expanding and changing the way we teach and learn so that we can support today's students better? So keep those in mind, what technology is, ideas and product technologies and how they fit together, and what they have to do with affordances. And then I'll have a couple final questions after this lecture to enter on EdPuzzle. Thanks for listening.